The Heavy Knight is a defense-focused class designed to absorb enemy attacks and shield allies. However, it lacks versatility and is seen as one of the weakest classes. Its low attack power makes leveling up a challenge. Among all the weak classes, this one was considered the most effective. Even among other underperforming classes, it stood out as the worst. Elma Uden, heir of the Uden family, was set to undergo the Divine Blessing ceremony to receive his class. Since childhood, he had an odd ability. Anything he saw or learned felt familiar, unsettling him. As the ceremony began, the priest prepared to bestow his class, while his father confidently expected the god of the sword to grant him a powerful one. As the baptism ceremony began, Elma's past life memories resurfaced. He realized this world was identical to Magic World, a VR game he once played. The déjà vu now made sense. He had experienced this world before, but as a player. Now, he was truly living in it. Elmer received the Heavy Knight class, infamous in Magic World for being both powerful and useless. Despite its reputation, he was determined. If this world followed the game's rules, he could use it to his advantage. Excited, he proudly told his father, but his reaction was unexpected. Elma's father was in shock. Desperately, he asked, "Sword Saint, right?" But reality hit. Elma had received Heavy Knight, not the powerful class his father had hoped for. Realizing his mistake, Elma cursed himself for mixing past and present memories. In this world, easy-to-master classes were favored, while those requiring skill were dismissed. Heavy Knight was one of them. Elma's father, still in disbelief, demanded to see his status. The moment he did, his rage erupted. "Heavy Knight, what the hell does this mean?" he roared. The stats were abysmally low, barely registering on the status board, and there wasn't a single attack skill. To him, this class was utterly useless. Elma tried to calm him, pointing out his high HP and defense, but his father wasn't convinced. To him, this was a disaster. Elma's father, consumed by rage, struck him down. To him, the Heavy Knight class was a disgrace, unworthy of an Uden heir. He was relieved the ceremony was private. Public humiliation would have been unbearable. As Elma lay on the ground, he slowly processed the truth. His father saw him as nothing but a failure. Amid the tension, a girl stepped forward, reminding everyone that it was also her turn for the Divine Blessing ceremony. She seemed unfazed by the chaos, calmly asking if the ceremony could proceed now. Maris, from the Uden branch family, stepped forward for her Divine Blessing ceremony. Elma barely knew her, having only interacted a few times as children. Despite the chaos, his father insisted on proceeding immediately. As the ritual began, an uneasy feeling crept into Elma. Maris checked her status and revealed her new class, Sword Saint, the very class Elma's father had desperately wished for him. With a smirk, she addressed Elma, mocking his misfortune. She hinted that fate had favored her instead, as if she had stolen the talent meant for him. Elma, still stunned, struggled to grasp what had just happened. Elma's worst fear came true. His uneasiness had been justified. Maris received the Sword Saint class, the very one his father had dreamed of for him. His father immediately praised Maris, celebrating her as the ideal heir of the Uden household. Without hesitation, he declared her his new daughter and the rightful successor of the family. Elma, left in the background, could only watch as his place was stolen before his eyes. Elma watched in shock as his father embraced Maris, fully accepting her as his new child. The once branch family girl had now become the heir of the Uden household, a position that should have been his. The onlookers murmured among themselves, witnessing the sudden shift in family status. Meanwhile, Elma's mind raced. His place, his identity, had been stolen in an instant. Maris embraced her new role as the Uden successor, standing confidently beside Elma's father. With a twisted smile, she mocked Elma, recalling how she once believed he was destined to lead the family. But now, everything had changed. The position that was supposed to be his was now hers, and she was enjoying every moment of his downfall. Elma, overwhelmed by the betrayal and humiliation, could only stare in shock. Elma's father disowned him on the spot, declaring him unworthy of the Uden name. To him, the Heavy Knight was a disgrace. Furious, he ordered Elma to leave immediately. Desperate, Elma tried to argue that his class wasn't weak, but his father refused to listen. If he ever used the Uden name again, he would be executed. Without hesitation, his father turned away, leaving with Maris the daughter he now acknowledged. Elma was left alone, cast out from his own home. Elma was cast out of the mansion, abandoned with barely any money to his name, His father hadn't even bothered to listen to his pleas. Left with no choice, he boarded a carriage, leaving behind the life he once knew. As the city came into view, the reality of his exile began to sink in. He had lost his home, his status, and everything he was meant to inherit. But this was just the beginning of his new path. Elma settled into a small inn, still processing the betrayal and humiliation he had faced. His father had abandoned him without hesitation, discarding him as if he were nothing. He had lost everything: his home, his family, his status. But he refused to despair. Clenching his fist, he reminded himself of one thing: he still had the Heavy Knight class, a class that he knew held true power. No matter what others thought, he would prove them wrong. Elma began analyzing his new reality, comparing it to the game he once played. While the world's geography and history were different, the core mechanics seemed intact. To move forward, he needed to explore and gather information. Before anything else, he checked his status. If the Heavy Knight class had been altered in this world, it would change everything. Thankfully, his skill tree remained the same, bringing him a sense of relief. Elma analyzed his skill tree, realizing that every choice would shape his future. The system allowed free selection of skills, determining how his Heavy Knight class would develop over time. He had 5 skill points to allocate, and among his options, only Vow of the Heavy Armor was unique to his class. The rest were standard skills like increased defense and novice swordsmanship. With careful planning, he knew he could turn this so-called weak class into something formidable. The Vow of the Heavy Armor skill tree was infamous as a joke exclusive to the Heavy Knight class, difficult to use, and widely considered useless. But Elma knew better. If mastered, it was overwhelmingly powerful. Skills like novice swordsmanship could evolve into superior techniques, and increased defense ensured steady growth. Without hesitation, he invested all 5 skill points into Vow of the Heavy Armor, fully committing to his class. As Elma allocated his skill points, his Vow of the Heavy Armor skill quickly leveled up, unlocking Rampart Return and increasing his defense by +10. Despite its reputation as a weak skill, the rapid growth and stat boost confirmed his belief it had hidden potential. With a determined expression, he clenched his fist, satisfied with the result. Elma stepped into the wilderness, fully equipped and ready to test his Heavy Knight class. His stats were modest, with his attack, defense, and speed slightly enhanced by his new gear. Though his equipment was low tier, it was enough to get started. With his newly acquired Rampart Return skill, he was determined to push forward. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was the beginning of his true journey. Elma left the town behind, venturing into the wilderness to begin his journey. Dressed in basic armor and armed with a soldier's sword, he checked his status screen. Though his stats were still low, his defense had increased, and he had unlocked his first skill, Rampart Return. Despite his father's rejection and society's perception of the Heavy Knight class, he was determined to prove its true potential. This was the start of his path to strength. As Elma ventured deeper into the wilderness, he suddenly encountered a giant frog-like monster. Without warning, it lunged at him, its tongue extending rapidly in an attempt to strike. The attack came too suddenly, catching him off guard. But instead of panicking, he steadied himself, preparing to counter the unexpected assault. This was his first real battle, a test to prove the true strength of the Heavy Knight. The monster lunged, but Elma was ready. Activating Rampart Return, he absorbed the attack and countered instantly, sending the creature flying backward with force. The skill worked perfectly, proving that the Heavy Knight class wasn't just about defense, it had hidden potential for devastating counterattacks. The defeated monster collapsed, its body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Elma stood tall, his armor gleaming, the aftermath of his Rampart Return still lingering in the air. He had successfully countered the attack, proving that the Heavy Knight class was not useless. His defense wasn't just a shield, it was a weapon. With this victory, he felt his confidence grow. This was just the beginning of his strength. As the defeated monster dissolved into nothing, Elma felt a surge of power. He had leveled up. The battle had proven that Rampart Return was far more effective than he expected. Though victorious, he couldn't shake off the gruesome sight before him. The monster hadn't even been able to scratch him, confirming that his defense far outmatched weaker enemies. Elma picked up a level 2 mana stone from the remains of the fallen monster. Though it wasn't worth much, he decided to keep it for now, as every resource mattered. Just as he was about to move on, a desperate scream echoed through the forest. Someone was pleading for help. Alert, he turned toward the direction of the voice. A panicked adventurer ran through the woods, screaming for his life, convinced that he was about to be killed. Elma noticed him from a distance. The adventurer's frantic cries for help echoed in the forest, and Elma realized the danger he was in. As the adventurer stumbled closer, Elma could already see the threat behind him, the monstrous frog-like creatures closing in. The adventurer's panic only grew as a swarm of frog-like monsters chased him relentlessly through the forest. Their bulging eyes and sticky tongues flicked out as they closed in, ready to attack. Still gasping for breath, the adventurer looked at Elma in desperation, questioning if he could really handle them. Elma, calm and composed, simply told him to leave it to him. Elma calmly declared that he had just leveled up for the first time, unfazed by the approaching monsters. The adventurer, however, was in shock. He couldn't believe that a rookie could handle such a threat. Panic overtook him as he insisted that Elma was far weaker than him and had no chance against so many monsters. His voice was filled with doubt, unable to comprehend Elma's confidence. The adventurer, still overwhelmed by fear, desperately shouted at Elma to take off his heavy armor and escape. He believed that Elma had no chance of outrunning the monsters while wearing such cumbersome gear. Meanwhile, the frog-like creatures launched themselves at full speed, their tongues stretching out aggressively, ready to strike. The adventurer clenched his fists, gritting his teeth in frustration as he watched Elma stand his ground against what he saw as an unwinnable battle. As the frog lunged at him, Elma firmly gripped his shield and swung it with immense force. The impact sent multiple creatures flying backward, their bodies crashing violently into the ground. Elma continued his relentless counterattack, launching another powerful strike with his shield. The force sent multiple frog-like creatures flying, their bodies smashing against the ground with loud impacts. Elma stood amidst the fallen creatures, his presence overwhelming. The battlefield was littered with defeated Lana monsters, their lifeless bodies sprawled across the ground. The adventurer who had pleaded for help could hardly believe what he was seeing. Shaken, he muttered in disbelief, unable to comprehend how Elma had single-handedly dealt with so many of them. Elma, gripping his weapon firmly, started to introduce himself. However, he stopped midway. Instead of finishing his full name, he simply declared, "No." Elma turned away from the battlefield, his cape swaying as he faced the stunned adventurer. With a composed but firm expression, Elma spoke. He no longer associated himself with the Advan household. Elma stood firm, his presence unwavering as he received the title of Unshakable. It was a fitting name for someone who had just demonstrated overwhelming strength against a horde of monsters. The adventurer who had sought his help remained on the ground, still stunned by the battle he had just witnessed. Elma, without hesitation, activated his status window. He needed to confirm how much he had grown from the fight. Elma checked his status window, confirming that this world followed Magic World's game mechanics. His new title, Immovable, and the skill Castle Wall return cemented his role as an unbreakable tank. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Elma!" Turning, he saw the adventurer from before, now looking relieved and amazed. Introducing himself as Ares, he explained that he had come from a small village to become an adventurer, but struggled to form a party due to being seen as unreliable. Desperation led him to enter the forest alone, nearly costing him his life until Elma saved him. But what truly stunned him was how Elma had reached level 3 single-handedly, an impossible feat for a beginner. Elma dismissed Ares' gratitude, stating that the battle was just a good way to level up. He then claimed all the magic stones from the defeated monsters without hesitation. Ares, still amazed, suggested forming a party once they returned, saying he had a proposal for Elma. Elma, analyzing the situation, pointed out that Ares had been left behind and was struggling. He understood that defensive classes like his were usually unpopular, but he had already accepted that reality. However, Ares seemed determined. With enthusiasm, he vowed to convince others, insisting that Elma was a great guy and someone worth following. Elma remained silent as Ares passionately insisted on convincing others to accept him. However, Elma was still reluctant, gripping a mana stone while contemplating his structured way of doing things. Ares urged him not to be stubborn, pointing out that he'd never level up properly if he kept working alone. A nearby adventurer, overhearing the conversation, scoffed at Elma's defensive class, questioning how he intended to advance on his own. Despite his usual composure, Elma muttered an apology, seemingly acknowledging Ares' point. Ares was right, defensive classes were most effective when they drew enemy attacks and protected their allies. But whether Elma was ready to rely on others was another question. Elma pondered his situation, realizing that if he joined a party, his experience gain would be divided, making leveling up inefficient. He wanted to grow stronger on his own, earn valuable items and skill titles without relying on others. However, doubt crept into his mind. Would others even believe in his strength? Flashes of his past resurfaced: his father's rejection and Elma's forced departure. He had lost his place in the world and had yet to stand on his own feet. And now, he wasn't even sure where he truly belonged. Ares urged Elma to aim higher, insisting that his current pace wouldn't be enough. While Elma had impressive strength, hunting small monsters wouldn't let him reach his full potential. Ares believed that Elma was capable of much more and tried to convince him to think bigger. He admired Elma's abilities, but also worried that Elma might be limiting himself. As their conversation continued, a sinister presence loomed in the darkness, its glowing eyes locked onto them. Just as Ares finished speaking, a monstrous creature suddenly appeared: a massive spider with razor-sharp legs slammed into the ground, shaking the earth. Ares' eyes widened in shock, realizing the danger before him. The creature let out a piercing screech, its multiple legs lunging forward aggressively. The sudden attack caught them off guard. The situation had just taken a dangerous turn. The monstrous spider-like creature roared, baring its razor-sharp fangs as it lunged forward. Ares, frozen in shock, barely reacted before Elma swiftly raised his shield to intercept the attack. Elma quickly activated his status screen, trying to assess the situation, while Ares muttered in disbelief. The creature's overwhelming presence left him horrified, questioning how such a terrifying monster could exist here. As Ares stumbled back in shock, the monstrous spider thrust its razor-sharp legs into the ground, sending cracks through the terrain. Elma stood firm, assessing the situation. The creature's name and stats appeared: Ra 163131 on, labeled as a Thing Demon. It was a high-level monster, possessing the deadly abilities Fire Claw and a poisonous movement obstruction skill. Ares, realizing its strength, panicked. "It's twice my level," he muttered, knowing he stood no chance. Elma, however, remained unfazed, mocking the creature for sneaking around using stealth-based skills. Elma analyzed the battle, realizing a crucial flaw in his skill. The Rampart Return ability wouldn't activate unless his defense was significantly higher than his opponent's attack power. Against this Thing Demon, it provided almost no advantage. As the fight escalated, Elma knew a single hit from the enemy's flame attack would be disastrous. Meanwhile, Ares panicked, overwhelmed by the situation. He desperately tried to reassure himself that he could handle it, but deep down, he blamed himself for what was happening. Ares, trying to act bravely, insisted on taking care of the enemy and told Elma to run. His voice was shaky, revealing his nervousness. Elma, however, refused to back down and firmly stated that he would handle it. Ares hesitated, visibly trembling, but still insisted that he was fine. Elma observed him carefully, realizing that Ares was barely holding himself together. Ares panicked, doubting that Elma could win against the Aranda ape. He warned that this demon wasn't something a rookie could handle physically. Elma, however, remained calm and confident. He acknowledged the difficulty of the game but believed that victory wasn't impossible. Elma confidently confronts the monkey spider. Using the skill Hedatherm, he temporarily lowers the attack power of the enemy, making it easier for him to manage the fight. He prepares himself, saying that he will take care of it.